He was Hideyoshi's greatest weapon, a mind so sharp, his own master, a Christian in a land of samurai, a man who survived a year in a dungeon and came out dangerous. What kind of strategist terrifies the man who rules Japan?
He walked with a permanent limp. He wore a black hood to hide what a year in a dungeon had taken from him. And the man who had unified Japan was terrified of what he might do next. Why?
Kuroda Yoshitaka, known to history as Kanbei, was born in 1546 in Harima Province on the western coast of Honshu. The Kuroda were minor lords, not poor, but not powerful. They held a modest castle at Himeji and served the larger Kodera clan. In the fractured politics of the Sengoku period, minor lords survived by choosing their alliances carefully and executing them well. Kanbei grew up understanding this. He did not have the resources to win by force. He would have to win by thinking.
Kanbei entered the orbit of Toyotomi Hideyoshi in the early 1570s, when Hideyoshi was still one of Oda Nobunaga's generals campaigning through western Japan. What Hideyoshi found in Kanbei was not another sword arm. He had plenty of those. It was a different kind of intelligence, the ability to look at a military or political situation and immediately see what everyone else had missed. Kanbei did not think about battles. He thought about the conditions that made battles unnecessary. The best outcome, in his analysis, was always the one where nobody had to die.
The role of a gunshi, a military strategist in Sengoku Japan, was both essential and precarious. A commander needed someone who could see the whole board, not just the immediate engagement, but a strategist who saw too clearly, who thought too many moves ahead, became a kind of threat in himself. His value and his danger were the same quality. Kanbei was, by every account that survives, exceptional at the role. His method was consistent. Understand the opponent's constraints before planning your own moves. Turn psychology into geography. Win before the fighting begins.
In the campaigns of the 1570s, Kanbei demonstrated the quality that would define him. When Hideyoshi laid siege to a castle, Kanbei looked for the way to take it without a siege. He negotiated surrenders that other commanders would have fought for. He sent letters rather than soldiers, identified the one person whose defection would unravel the defense, and found terms that allowed enemies to become allies. By the late 1570s, Western Japan was littered with castles and domains that had fallen to Kanbei's persuasion rather than Hideyoshi's army. The bloodless victories were his masterwork.
Around 1578, Kuroda Kanbei was baptized as a Christian by the Jesuit missionary Organtino, taking the baptismal name Simeon. This was not a marginal decision. Christianity had been present in Japan since Francis Xavier arrived in 1549, and in certain domains, particularly in Western Japan, it had found substantial followings, including among the samurai class. Kanbei's conversion appears to have been sincere. He maintained his faith through decades of political pressure that would test it severely. What drew him to it?
is not recorded, but the faith he adopted would complicate every subsequent year of his life.
In the autumn of 1578, a senior Oda commander named Araki Murashige rebelled. Hideyoshi sent Kanbei to Itami Castle to negotiate. Kanbei went alone, as was his method. He did not come back. Araki had imprisoned him, apparently fearing that Kanbei's arrival was itself part of a plot. Hideyoshi, receiving no word, concluded that Kanbei had defected. He ordered Kanbei's son, Nagamasa, executed. Only the intervention of another strategist, Takenaka Hanbei, who personally vouched for Kanbei's loyalty and kept the boy alive, prevented the execution. Kanbei spent the next year in a pit beneath Itami Castle.
When Itami Castle fell in late 1579, and Kanbei was freed, he emerged physically transformed. The year of imprisonment had taken his hair. It never grew back fully. His joints had suffered in the damp and cold, leaving him with a permanent limp. He adopted the black hood that would mark him for the rest of his life, covering the evidence of what had been done to him. Those who saw him after the imprisonment noted something else, a quality of stillness that had not been there before. The dungeon had not broken him. It had, if anything, distilled him.
Back in Hideyoshi's service, Kanbei rebuilt his position with the same method he had always used, by being indispensable. His imprisonment had, if anything, sharpened his strategic thinking. He was present at every major campaign of the early 1580s. His solutions became more audacious. Where others saw an obstacle, Kanbei saw the specific pressure point that would make the obstacle collapse. He rarely raised his voice in councils. He rarely needed to. When Kanbei spoke, the room went quiet, not from deference, but from the immediate recognition that what he was about to say would be the thing they all needed to hear. In 1582, Hideyoshi was conducting the siege of Takamatsu Castle in Bichu Province, a fortress built on low ground, surrounded by swamp. Assault was impossible, and starvation would take months. Kanbei devised a solution: redirect the local rivers, build earthen dikes, and flood the entire area until Takamatsu became an island. Within weeks, the castle was surrounded not by besieging troops, but by water. The garrison watched their food stores submerge and their retreat close off. Takamatsu was effectively finished without a frontal assault. It was the kind of solution that made enemies feel that fighting Kanbei was somehow unfair. On June 2nd, 1582, a messenger reached the Takamatsu siege lines with news from Kyoto. Oda Nobunaga had been assassinated at Honnoji by his own general, Akechi Mitsuhide. The man who had assembled the power structure that made Hideyoshi possible was gone. Every calculation in Japan had just changed. While the other commanders absorbed the shock, Kanbei's response was immediate. He leaned toward Hideyoshi and said, in words that have been recorded in multiple accounts, "The realm is yours for the taking. We must move at once." He had understood the consequence before anyone else in the room had finished reading the message.
Hideyoshi
did move at once. The famous forced march from Takamatsu to Yamazaki that covered the distance in half the expected time. He defeated Akechi Mitsuhide within days and was positioned to claim succession to Nobunaga's power. In the months that followed, as Hideyoshi consolidated his authority, he is reported to have said of Kanbei, "If that man had 10 more years of life, he would take the realm for himself." It was the most precise expression of fear a commander could feel about a subordinate. Not suspicion of treachery, but recognition of capability. Kanbei was too intelligent, and Hideyoshi knew it.
In 1587, Toyotomi Hideyoshi issued the Batarin Expulsion Edict, ordering Jesuit missionaries to leave Japan within 20 days and banning Christianity among the samurai class. The reasons were partly political. He had grown uneasy with the Christian daimyo of Western Japan, whose loyalty to a foreign religion he saw as a divided loyalty. For Kanbei, this created an impossible situation. He was a public servant of the man who had just banned his faith. The record suggests he managed the contradiction carefully, publicly removing himself from visible Christian practice, while the private dimensions of his belief remained his own.
Hideyoshi's invasion of Korea, launched in 1592 and resumed in 1597, was the largest overseas military operation in Japanese history, and by most historical assessments, a strategic catastrophe. Multiple accounts suggest Kanbei advised against it, or at least against the scale of commitment it required. His analytical mind would have seen what other commanders did not: that Korea was defensible terrain, that Chinese intervention was predictable, and that wars fought far from home for unclear objectives do not end well. He was not listened to. He participated because he was a retainer, and retainers followed their lord. But the outcome vindicated his analysis.
Hideyoshi died in 1598, leaving the question of succession unresolved and Japan's political structure suddenly unstable. Kanbei, now known as Josui after his formal retirement, was in Kyushu when Sekigahara erupted in 1600. He saw the chaos and made an immediate calculation. If the battle was going to determine who ruled Japan, he could use the distraction to conquer Kyushu himself and arrive at the outcome with maximum leverage. He began taking castles and territory with characteristic efficiency. He won almost everything he attacked. But the Battle of Sekigahara was decided in a single morning. Ieyasu's victory came faster than Kanbei could consolidate Kyushu. When news arrived that Ieyasu had won Sekigahara decisively, Kanbei is reported to have paused his Kyushu campaign and said the battle ended too soon. It was not bitterness, or not only bitterness. It was the specific frustration of a strategist who had set a plan in motion, executed it correctly, and been defeated not by his opponent, but by timing. The window had closed. He stood down, surrendered his Kyushu gains where necessary, and accepted the new political reality with the same composure he had brought to everything. He had tried. The calculation had been reasonable,
the world simply moved faster than he had.
The question Kuroda Kanbei poses is about the relationship between intelligence and power. He was, by the testimony of his contemporaries, the clearest strategic mind of the Sengoku period. But the clearest mind in a hierarchy is not necessarily the safest position to occupy. Hideyoshi needed him and feared him simultaneously. Needed the thinking, feared the independence of the thinker. The Christian faith adds another layer, a belief system that valued human life, mercy, and a moral order beyond political calculation, held by a man whose professional value was precisely his ability to calculate without sentiment. How he held these two things together, the record does not say.
Kuroda Kanbei, Josui, died in 1604 at the age of 58. He had served the most powerful men of his era, survived imprisonment that would have broken most people, and outlasted the Sengoku period itself. His son, Nagamasa, the boy who had nearly been executed when Kanbei was imprisoned, went on to found the Kuroda domain at Fukuoka, which survived until the Meiji era. The son who was nearly killed because of his father's imprisonment founded a dynasty that lasted 2.5 centuries. Kanbei, characteristically, would have calculated the probability of that outcome and found it, perhaps, acceptable.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles, 700 years. They fought the Mongols. They fought the Chinese. They fought Toyotomi Hideyoshi. They fought Tokugawa Ieyasu. They were never fully conquered by any of them. The most defiant dynasty in Japanese history, the Shimazu clan. Coming next.
Kuroda Kanbei's legacy in Japan is the specific legacy of the brilliant subordinate, celebrated in history, celebrated in popular culture, studied in business schools for his strategic thinking, and ultimately defined by the fact that he served others rather than commanding himself. Whether this was loyalty or the practical recognition that the moment never quite arrived, the record does not resolve. What it does show is a man who brought extraordinary intelligence to every situation he entered, maintained a private faith under conditions designed to extinguish it, and never, in any documented account, lost his composure when the world failed to cooperate with his plans.